When Chair Danaher gets here, I'll turn over to, yes, in fact, we'll leave the gavel there so that it's ready for him. We'll kind of run things from the backup control station here. And so we'll begin with roll call.
Commissioner Johnston, present.
Ballantyne, present.
Schwartz, present.
Commissioner Forcell, present.
Okay, and so now moving into item 2, oral communications. I do have the one card here. Is this the time when we want to do that one?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Beth Miner, the city clerk, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about the open board and commission recruitments that we're doing right now for the Historic Resources Board and also the Human Relations Commission. We have 1 term on the HRB and 3 terms on the HRC. The recruitment has been extended to April 23rd, 2018, and I understand that my deputy, who usually comes here, gives the commission's members an assignment and some of the flyers and tells them that they're supposed to go and contact 2 people each to get them to apply. So I will bring these up and give them to you and do like he does and ask you if you can contact 2 of your friends or 2 people in the community and try and get them to apply for these commissions.
And since there are fewer of us here, then it's probably 3 people each?
That could be.
Could be, okay.
Could be. I will drop these off for you, and thank you for having me here tonight. It's the first time I've ever been to something other than council.
Thank you very much. And I also want to offer that we got to try pushing the buttons and making the voting lights light up. So thank you very much for showing us how that works. With item 3, Chair Danaher, I'll turn over to you.
All right. Any revisions on the agenda? Go ahead then.
Actually, I believe we're at approval of the minutes.
Oh, okay. Item 3.
Yes.
All right. Minutes from last meeting, do this, you must second that. All right. Motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second?
Favor?
Aye.
We already did the agenda part. Reports from
So last week, we had the second meeting of the Low-Income Community Solar Working Group that I'm part of. And it happened that what we did was a webcast of some foundational research that I had done. And one of the things that I think came out of the research that is relevant for Palo Alto is that as the group here had discussed before, that it's hard to make the numbers work for community solar in terms of being the cheapest form of electricity. I continue to be really impressed with the reasons to do community solar, because there are things that have to do with awareness and people being able to have jobs associated with it, and the utility staff being able to get familiar with it, of what it means to have it, for the public safety people to understand what it means to have solar available. And this idea of community involvement and community engagement is very key. And one of the ideas that got discussed was the idea of how these kinds of installations could be part of public buildings on publicly owned land, so that there are benefits that can be done to if you have an emergency situation and you're sort of looking at it from a resiliency standpoint so that you don't necessarily need to do the economics for just paying somebody back on one solar panel covers this or that. So I think it's something that as we get into those discussions further, perhaps it's something that I could be permitted to share with my colleagues, because I think there are lots of reasons to do it and consider these things.
Discussion of that later tonight.
Is it maybe appropriate to give a 1 or 2 minute update on the meeting we had earlier this week for the resiliency workshop?
Sure.
Or is that in?
It is still a work in progress, but certainly if you'd like to share with your colleagues or
Okay, so, yeah, I'll keep it brief. We had I thought, a very thoughtful meeting with Ed and Dean and Deborah from utility staff, but also a chance to meet with Kenneth Duker and a member of his team, thinking about things from the emergency side of things, thinking about how to make sure we have a very productive workshop on resiliency. So I think we had a pretty productive exchange on what each of us thought would work well, and also thinking of ways to sort of set up an agenda where you create some problems for those attending the workshop to think about and brainstorm around in a productive way. So I'm looking forward to that. I thought it was a great discussion.
And I think one of the things that we talked about that could be really interesting would be to invite corporations and entrepreneurs who are in the Palo Alto area who are working in this space to come and be part of the discussions, because then people who are working on new and novel things can have a chance to see how that they should be drawn into the conversation, because they may be able to bring stuff up as subject matter experts that could be really useful, that I think could help us. And I also think that just having the chance to have these conversations, I have to say, I've found them really helpful in the few that I've been involved in, have just been really useful for me as a commissioner to understand some of the backstory on things and why certain things are happening, and I think it's really useful.
Very good, thank you, and look forward more to come on that resiliency topic as we put together our next steps. I do have a few items to review with the commission, so I'll jump right in. First off, with regard to our Northern California Power Agency's involvement with community choice aggregation providers. NCPA recently won a contract to provide energy scheduling and related services to the city of San Jose, and it's a newly formed community choice aggregation provider called San Jose Clean Energy. As more CCAs are formed throughout California, NCPA has successfully competed now to provide services to 4 of these CCAs, including large providers, including the East Bay Clean Energy as well as San Jose. These contracts allow NCPA to use its existing power scheduling infrastructure to raise additional revenues to the benefits of its members, including City of Palo Alto. NCPA is on track to receive $1.8 million in revenue this year that directly offsets the $11.3 million power management budget, a 16% offset that will reduce Palo Alto's costs for power scheduling. This is one of several efforts underway in collaboration with our partner agencies to contain electric utility costs for Palo Alto customers. Let's see, follow up on our utility strategic plan. The City Council did approve our strategic plan on March 19th. Thank you once again to Commissioner Schwartz for her attendance at both the originally scheduled council review date in February, as well as where it was actually taken up on March 19th. The department's now moving forward into our implementation, and our management team and core planning group will remain involved in execution of strategic plan priorities, as well as engagement of staff within the department. And I do recall we're going to get a coffee cup, I think it was. We're figuring out exactly what that looks like as a follow-up to some offline discussion earlier. Appreciate the input and guidance from the commission throughout the process. Now, I would like to highlight a few upcoming events. First off, this coming Saturday, our Great Race, for saving water and Earth Day Festival, no Freudian slip there. The 5th annual Great Race for Saving Water and Earth Day Festival is this Saturday, April 14th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Palo Alto Baylands. We invite you to join us and other Bay Area organizations for a 5-kilometer run and walk and kids 1-kilometer fun run to celebrate healthy living, healthy communities, and healthy environment. Day starts off 9 a.m. at the Baylands Athletic Center with the Great Race. The fun will continue until 1 p.m. with an Earth Day Festival offering live music, food trucks, raffle drawings, electric vehicle ride and drive, nature activities, arts and crafts, community booths, and environmental and public safety resources. We do have more event information available at cityofpaloalto.org/Earth Day. I did note the electric vehicle ride and drive at the Earth Day Festival in partnership with Actera to provide this particular event. At last year's Earth Day Ride and Drive, 166 people test drove an electric vehicle, one or more, and studies have shown that 75% of the people who drive an EV will likely consider, test drive an EV, will likely consider making their next vehicle purchase electric. Let's see, next event, our mini sustainable landscape workshops will actually also be there at the Earth Day Festival. We're hosting mini workshops on sustainable landscaping in partnership with BOSCA, our Bay Area Water Supply Conservation Agency, and Santa Cruz Permaculture. Topics will include lawn replacement, permaculture, easy to grow native plants. Let's see, on the 24th of April, we'll co-host a heat pump water heater workshop with Passive House California, inviting residents, manufacturers, and other public agencies, representatives, and decarbonization groups to learn about this technology. One more to save the date, our municipal services open house will be back again this year on Saturday, May 12th. So save the date for us, please. This will be part of Public Service Recognition Week, which is a national recognition, May 6th through 12th. City will be hosting a series of events during the week in recognition of our employees in connection with the community. This will be Saturday, May 12th. Let's see, from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Municipal Services Center on East Bayshore Road. MSC will be open for the public with project demonstrations, displays, and fun activities from utilities, public works facilities, police, fire, and community services, and the Administrative Services Department, the warehouse, will also be participating. So please, UAC members, join us. And that concludes my report.
There is one thing from sitting in this, in the city council meeting with the discussion that happened.
Again, for being there.
Sure.
Yeah. Twice.
Twice, right, doing it twice, yes. What occurred to me as I was listening to some of what the questions were, that we have a disconnect between what we necessarily think are the priorities and what the city council thinks. And the study session that we had a few months ago was not sufficient to draw those out. And I don't know what the proper way to deal with that is, but I think that we have to, I think that there's some alignment that needs to happen, and I think we may need some guidance about how to make that happen. And I think that, and so I think it would just be helpful for us. So I don't know how this has been done in the past,
Are there
but
any specifics you can share on the disconnect?
Please turn on your microphone. We're not picking it up on the TV broadcast. Thanks.
On top.
Oh.
Your microphone, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Well, so I'll just give you one that I think is an important one. So I think the people who are on the UAC feel that it is very important, sort of legally and ethically, that we cover our costs as whatever the, what it, you know, if it costs $2 to have this pen, then that's what it costs. And I think the way we've been approaching rates and things like that have been very reflective of the cost of service and what that is. And there were some members on the council who were more concerned with how the rates were relative to PG&E rates. And, you know, there may be times that we can be cheaper, and there may be some time where we'll be even because there's a contract difference, and I know it comes up. But I think that's something that there needs, we have a liaison here sometimes who doesn't necessarily bring up those issues, and I think we need some sort of way to have it come the other way so that we have an exchange on that. And so that would be an example of one that I didn't think we were in alignment.
Let's see, well, perhaps we just offer the reinforcement that I believe now, having been through a couple of rounds of both the study session that happens once a year with the council, as well as now for the first time bringing forward our strategic plan, and as we will be over the next couple of meetings coming forward with rate recommendations, I will offer an observation that the council pays significantly more attention to a specific item that's brought forward to them than could, in all likelihood, be just brought up out of the blue in the context of a joint study session. So the joint study sessions, I think, may not tee up enough specificity for them to give you a really substantive response. So as we're coming forward with rates, they're definitely paying attention, and so this will be a good opportunity to, I think, get more specific feel for their sensitivity on issues such as rates, and as such, as the rates, again, just as one example, local solar may be another example, come forward from the UAC, then to either the Finance Committee or the full council, then it may be helpful for you to identify a representative to convey the deliberations and some of the issues that come up at UAC with the council. So I think that strengthening that communication would be helpful. The liaison can certainly play a role in that, but it certainly also helps to have UAC voices as well.
Okay. Thank you. And Judith, thank you for mentioning that. Any other commissioner comments? Okay. So we'll get on to our new business. This back to rates.
'Tis the season.
Tis the season.
So why don't we lead off with our electric rates. Eric Kennison, our rates manager, will present for staff. I would like to note that we have actually a correction that you'll hear about in the presentation. You should have, is it a revised, well, it's labeled revised presentation, in that in doing our calculations for the recommended rate changes for the year, sharpened our pencils and, in fact, well, our spreadsheets as the case may be, and identified that the proposed rates could actually be lower than was indicated in your report. I believe a report, let's see where it is, had reflected a recommended 9% increase, but the revised presentation will indicate a 7% increase. So, or 6, what? I even got that wrong. Okay, so we'll let Eric proceed from there.
Good evening, Commissioners. So, as was mentioned, tonight we'll be bringing to you a revised, it's a 6% recommended rate increase for the electric utility, followed by, right now with that plan, looks like a 3% in year 20 and 2% the year after. So this does reflect a reduction from what was in the packet, but we've gone through and made sure that this is fiscally reasonable and sound. The other thing that I will note on this slide specifically is the caveat on the water rate increase at this point in time. We will be revisiting that with the Finance Committee, I believe, on Tuesday. So the 4% may change going forward. So. As can be seen here, we have, this is with the 6, 3, and 2, we should be getting our revenue projections right up to match our cost projections. So, and this is actually fairly similar to what we expressed last year. I believe last year we came forward with we were estimating we need about a 7% rate increase, but we're able to bring that down just slightly. We did increase the next outer 2 years just to make it more reasonable with how we see costs lining up. The other one thing that you can notice here, the orange bars, we do have in the short term a slight increase in CIP expenditures for some upcoming projects, but then everything is coming back down after 2021. Some of those capital investments, though, are related to smart grid improvements, which right now in our current models, we are assuming that the funding for that will come from the Electric Special Projects Reserve. So. And again, just comparing a few years, you can see that in the long run, the majority of change that we have coming up for expenses is really driven by the supply portfolio. We know that we're going to be having changes in our transmission access charges. We have increased renewables costs coming online, and that's really driving the change between FY16, which was our take as a normal year, going out to FY 2022. And in fact, between FY 19 and 2022, costs are about the same overall. So with in FY 19, again, we have a slight uptick in capital projects, but then that's decreasing. So the supply reserves are remaining relatively healthy. And the other nice thing about this planned increase is we're only at this point in time looking to need to withdraw from the hydro stabilization reserve about $1 million. In last year's plan, we said we were going to withdraw upwards of like $6 million. We realized we don't need to do quite that much. And the other the benefit of this too is if we come into another dry hydro year or we enter into another drought, having more money in that reserve is going to be critical for the financial health of the utility.
So this is not a dry year.
It has not been a dry year, but
no,
we're.
Let me about it another way. Are we getting less hydropower than we expect?
Yes, yes, we will.
Okay.
So we were heading into one of the driest years through February. Those March storms did a lot, and they took it from an extremely dry year to just a little bit of a dry year in terms of total precipitation. But I'd also note that the snowpack is pretty low right now. And so we're getting a lot of the flow early in the season, which means sometimes it may even spill, meaning it doesn't run through a generator. So we'll still be getting less than average hydroelectric generation, but it won't be, it's not extremely low or even.
Okay.
It's
I wouldn't want to see us
bit low.
drawing on our reserves if we were getting everything we expected.
No.
Okay.
And again, with this current rate proposal, the distribution operations reserve, it was below the minimum guideline in 2017, but we are transferring funds in to bring it up to within guideline levels. So probably the best, here's the health of the supply operations reserve. It's looking to be right around, floating around the target level during the forecast period. A little lower in some years, a little higher in the out years. And the distribution reserve, though, once we bring it back up, is expected to stay right around the target level. So, and both reserves well above the risk.
Would you go back a slide, please?
Surely.
I was looking at this earlier. I couldn't understand why it dipped so much and went up so much.
We
18
are,
to 19 to 20.
so we are doing some intra-fund transfers between the supply to the distribution to help buoy up the distribution reserve while still keeping everything within the minimum max guidelines.
Okay.
So, and other than that, the revised recommendation, so again, we are bringing forth tonight the resolution for the FY19 Electric Utility Financial Plan and all of the attendant rates, with the caveat that everything is going to be amended to reflect a 6% rate increase rather than the current 9%. So with that, I welcome any questions.
AC?
So, I mean, I'm really pleased to see that you could bring it down from 9% to 6%. And I've got a question maybe I'll come back to, but you're proposing a 6% increase for this year, and then a 3%, and then a 2%, and then 0, 1, 1, 1. And I'm wondering if there's a way of kind of leveling that out. And so instead of having a, 6% and then fairly small increases, there's a way of flattening that curve out.
The 6% gets us right into the, gets us back into the guideline ranges with all the transfers. We're still planning on moving some money out of the electric special projects reserve as a temporary loan. So not quite as much as we were expecting last year, but this is still requiring a bunch of incoming money.
So what you're saying, as I understand, is that you need the 6% next year to get the reserves back within the guidelines.
It gets us back on track, yes.
You showed the chart that it's the supply costs that are really driving the cost increases. Do we have any control over that? I mean, aren't these, except for when we do spot purchases, aren't we locked into kind of long-term contracts for most of this supply?
We have some limited control over it. It's usually, it's influence in a long term. It's influence over the long term rather than year to year. So for example, one of the things that we've been hearing from the commission over the last year is that you're open to us optimizing the portfolio for cost around our renewables, that as long as we're meeting state compliance rules, that we could sell off some of our more expensive renewables and buy cheaper renewables. So that's one strategy that we can consider. The other thing we do over the long term is work with our partner agencies like NCPA and Transmission Agency of Northern California. We also have a local partnership with a few utilities, and we intervene in transmission cases. And we've actually seen significant savings. While transmission costs are going up significantly, they would be going up even higher if it weren't for some of these interventions.
So obviously, the more that you can do to kind of keep those costs down, the better we'll be in the future. But I understand that those are long-term issues rather than short-term.
They are. I can add one short-term cost containment measure. We recently refinanced, or NCPA recently refinanced the debt on the Calaveras resource, and I think Palo Alto's share of that savings, it was about a $1.8 million savings, which would put Palo Alto's share, 1.2, which puts Palo Alto's share in a few $100,000, which is small, but you keep doing those sorts of things and it adds up over time.
And another thing, you show a number of charts that Santa Clara, City of Santa Clara has lower rates than we do, and I know I saw that they get their power from Silicon Valley Power, which I'm not familiar with, but why are their rates lower?
Well, perhaps definitional. Silicon Valley Power is the city of Santa Clara. They're branded under the label of Silicon Valley Power. And why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so some of the things I can speak to about Silicon Valley Power, they have an in-town, there are a few things. So first off, they have some of their, I think they just ended their last coal contract in December of last year. They have an in-town gas plant that I think is largely paid for. And then they also have a very different, their city is very different. I mean, they're seeking industrial customers. In fact, the number of data centers that they're adding down there, manufacturing and data centers, when you have a heavy user like that, highly energy dense customers cost less to serve at the end of the day, and so they end up reducing costs for everybody. So.
Let me also perhaps elaborate, or I'll say translate for us lay people. One of the pieces that Jonathan referred to, the in-town gas plant, natural gas-fired generation located within the city of Santa Clara. As a result of having generation within the city, they avoid the TAC charge, as Jonathan pointed out, the transmission access charge, which is really a cost to PG&E and other owners of the grid, effectively. And so having the generation within the local area avoids is it roughly 20% or so surcharge that comes with electricity that's generated from a more remote generation site.
Thank you.
Speaks to the value of having local generation, doesn't it?
Exactly what I was thinking.
Other questions or comments? So there was pushback on the rates from the last meeting, and so maybe it's important to note the reasons for these when the recommendation goes forward. The importance of keeping the reserves is obvious, but just tell us again for the record, how much does it cost us when we have a bad drought year?
In a bad drought year, we can easily exhaust everything that we have in the hydro stabilization reserve. I mean, I believe we've at one point in time, how much? Currently we have like 11.6 million. We can easily go through all of that. In fact, I think in some years we've gone even upwards of 20. Yes, the annual hit.
It's in the ballpark of $8 to $10 million.
Yeah, and some of
In a
the
year.
recent years have been higher than that, 12 million or more, if I remember
Yeah.
right. So I don't think we have much room to take from future reserves. We've really got to be pay-as-you-go here with uncertainty about the weather, in my view. Lisa?
What's the status of the hydro rate adjuster, and will that help us weather drought years and not have to dip into the reserves?
I'm glad you brought that up. It will. The main thing that I'm concerned about is the fact that when reserves are low and it's a very dry year, the amount of the rate adjuster is in the ballpark of, or the effective percentage increase for the rate adjuster is in the ballpark of 10% on the bill, 8 to 10% on the bill. And so if we were to drain reserves further in order to spread rate increases over future years, we raise the risk that we go from no rate adjuster at all to a full rate adjuster in 1 year because we have very low reserves. If we were to have higher reserves, even if they were a little bit low, we would look at a sort of mid-level rate adjuster at about a 5% increase in the first year and maybe a full-fledged 10% in the second year. So it would have a less of an impact year on year. It would have less of an impact year on year. Essentially, if you have very low reserves and very low hydro, you slam people into the highest level of the hydro rate adjuster, whereas if you have mid-level reserves, you have time to phase that in over a couple of years.
Further questions, discussion? Now I can make a motion. Staff's recommendation.
Can I ask one quick question? I remember a year ago, I think the rate change was coincident with an update from the cost of services analysis, or maybe that was the year before, but I remember it changed the rate structuring that you were able to use. Has any of that changed at all, or is that more or less exactly the same as it was? Like when I just run the numbers on basic rates using the table you've got on the screen here, it does kind of have tiering to it, right?
Yes.
Usage tiering to it. And I remember in that last conversation, some of our ability to create usage tiering was taken away because you had to essentially charge only for what it cost. And setting rates higher for higher usage tiers wasn't actually borne out by the cost of services audit.
Well, no, we do still have tiers. We just reduced from having 3 tiers down to 2.
To 2?
Yes.
Okay, so, and that isn't changing?
No, that is not changing.
Okay, thanks very much.
All right. Any further discussion on the recommendation? Is there a motion to approve the staff's recommendations?
I'll move that we approve the staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 2, now we come to the gas.
Okay. Moving on to gas, and here tonight we have a 4% recommended rate increase. So here we're looking at a series of a 4% rate increase in FY19, followed by a series of 8% and 7% rate increases. So again, in the short term, a lot of this is borne out by the fact that we have an increase in capital investment costs over the next 3 years or so. And gas supply at this juncture is projected to remain relatively flat, although that can change at any time based upon market. Gas supply operations is looking to increase by roughly about inflation. But, you know, if you look at it over the long run, the operations is a major cost driver, and distribution capital improvement is another major driver. In fact, if you look at it going out between FY13 and FY22, commodity costs are looking to possibly even decrease overall. So some of that effect can offset some of the increased costs we have there. One of the things we do in our operations reserve is going to be decreasing somewhat, where this series of rate increases is expecting that we'll be drawing down all of our rate stabilization reserves, what remains of it. So by FY 2020, we won't have anything left there. And so all of the rate increase that we have right now is all for distribution-related rate increases. We have quite a few components that are passed through. Commodity, the cap and trade cost, our carbon neutrality cost, the transmission cost that we get to bring gas here in from over PG&E's lines. That is something that we have a rate schedule from PG&E, and we just pass that through to customers directly. Now with this, our reserves are quite healthy right now, but with the cost increases that we're seeing with relation to capital spending, we do anticipate that this is going to draw down these reserves rapidly, and we'll be projecting that we'll be hitting the minimum right about 2022. So it's a small increase now and larger rate increases in future years, but we see this as necessary to bring us up to one, to keep us above minimum, but also in this fund, you can see that the risk assessment level is not that far below the minimum level. Plus, there's not a lot of reserve in this fund overall. The minimum level is only $6 million. So it's easy to hit that lower level and drop fast. But like I said, the overall rate increase that we're seeing at this point in time is about a 4% rate increase. The summer months, because we were using July 2017, and there were some differences in how much transmission costs were back then, et cetera, it shows it slightly higher. But as of all prices as they are February timeframe, the change would be about 4% to most customer bills. But even with this, we are currently during the winter months, we're well below PG&E's current bills. And in the summer months, we run sometimes a little bit higher, but that's mainly due to our monthly fixed charge that we have. But on the commercial side, we're not nearly as competitive, but we're staying right about the same level there. And with that, that ends my presentation and so tonight
Yeah, thank you for a succinct presentation on both of these points. Questions, comments from folks? AC?
I do, and I'm sure there's something I'm missing here, but in the report, on page 3 of the executive summary, you have two tables 1 and 2, which, as I read them, show increases of 6% or a little bit over 7%. Is that just a component of the overall bill? Is that why?
So yes, so 4% is the overall average rate increase. We're increasing the distribution component by 6%. And so the net effect on overall bills is 4%.
Okay, and the distribution component is, that's not the pass-through cost of the transmission?
No.
What does distribution cover?
So the distribution covers all of our internal, all of the operations within the city system, maintenance of our own mains, capital improvement of our own mains here in the city. So it's everything that happens within our borders.
So the capital improvement is included in that?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what's really driving the overall?
In the short term, yes.
Okay. And what is the capital improvement project that's going to drive that increase for next year?
So let me see. I don't believe I have a slide on the individual.
Commissioner Ballantyne is pointing to page 25 here. It's the gas main replacement?
Yes. So if you look over the last few years, we've not had any new gas main replacement funding. So we're going to be moving forward with getting back on track with having annual gas main replacements, for one. Another big bump that you can see in FY 2020, some in FY 2020 and FY 2021 are we're going to be, or the plan currently is to move to an AMI system, but that will involve us going out and redoing all of our meters to be AMI enabled. So, and that's going to run about an extra $3 to $4 million.
And it's in the electric that there's a fund that's set aside for the AMI, right? But not in the gas?
Correct. But right now, how we are structuring it is that the electric is covering just the electric portion, and the water is going to cover its own, and the gas its own.
Okay.
There's a possibility that we could look at other funding options, but yes.
So to oversimplify things vastly, could we say that the rate increase is largely driven by the gas main replacement?
Yes, in the short, to bring us back up, yes, by gas main replacements, as well as, I will say this, that we have noticed that a lot of the contract bids that we've had coming back for projects that we've gone out, have come back quite a bit higher.
I
So
think we
this
understand that.
reflects,
We understand the problems with the
yeah.
capital
Yeah.
expenses. I do.
So Commissioner, you're looking at, let's see, it is page 26, at the top, table 13, that has, to your point, shows the figures associated with the gas main replacement,
Yes.
going up to over 7 million in FY '20 and beyond. Eric also pointed out, one-time projects includes the AMI, as
Yes.
noted, and one of the options we're just beginning to look at is the potential to spread out the cost of the AMI, possibly through debt financing, rather than having that all hit at one time. So you'll be hearing more about that as we look further into it.
Okay, thank you.
Does when the budgeting for addressing crossbores, does it show up here, or does it does? Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
It's
so
in the
that's also
operations
an
budget, so yes.
Got it, thank you.
On page 24. So on page 24, underneath the second paragraph portion, it talks about the crest bore.
I think, given what happened in the Finance Committee, Lessing, I think it's very important to frame this in terms of safety and emission control. So since some of the fears that people in the community have about natural gas being part of the portfolio has to do with being worried about emissions, and you've talked about how you have a great program and you manage it carefully and it's not really something you have to worry about, I think I would make that more visible so that that's really clear. And one of the other issues that comes up in AMI discussions for gas and water is the idea of leak detection, which tends to be very much top of mind for people, even more so than outage detection and restoration. So I think talking about the benefits rather than just generically talking about capital improvements is important. The other thing is that some of the discussion had to do with the deferral of maintenance, because after all, somehow it's going to be cheaper to get contractors in the future to do this work. And I don't know that that's really a realistic view, that we, there's, I don't know where the idea that it's going to be cheaper in 5 years to get people to do this work, like, I don't know where that comes from. And so if you have evidence to support that that hasn't been the historical trajectory of people giving you bids, I think it would be prudent to include that in your presentation that you give.
Noted, thank you.
As a follow-up question, if the projects that are slated in FY 2019 that are put out to bid come back significantly higher than expected, what does that do to the health of the gas utility? It would just mean a higher rate increase in FY 2020, or would it have an immediate impact?
So if bids came back and we opted to recommend going forward with the project, and yes, we would pull what we could from reserves, and that might reflect needing to have a higher rate increase later. But
the reserves could absorb higher than expected bids, or would it mean that those projects would have to be deferred for a year until rates could increase to catch up?
As of right now, we're projected to have about $8 million sitting in reserves at the end of FY18. So, we're above minimum level, $6 million, with figure $2 million cushion in there if we needed to. But again, what would that do we'd range up the outer year increases to bring us, ideally to keep us within minimum, so.
Lisa, more?
No, the order of magnitude of expected CIP spending is 5 million. So what I heard you say was it's sort of like there's a $2 million.
If
Reserves would remain within target levels if the bids came in up, what is
Yeah.
that, 40% over, so to
Yeah.
speak?
Yeah, if we have a $6.5 million project, say in FY '20, and you know, and it came in at 8, we could take that and absorb
Yeah.
it.
All right, I have more questions about the reserves. One of these is that I've forgotten how the guidelines are set and whether there's inflation adjustment and the like in those. Could you remind us or tell us how the guidelines are set?
So the guidelines, the minimum guideline level is set at 60 days of operating and plus commodity expense, and the maximum is set at 120 days. So that's
For the operations reserve?
Yes.
And the commodity reserve? Okay. So you've done away with the rate stabilization reserve. What's the thinking there? What was it for, and why are you doing away with it?
Well, when we had the rate stabilization reserve used to be a catch-all. It encompassed all of the risks that we had, and after it was an auditor review of our reserves, we went through and it was determined that we want to create various buckets for what we're holding reserves for. So that's we had the operations reserve was set up specifically to deal with operational cost variances. Anything more than that was left in the rate stabilization reserve to help mitigate against future rate increases, which is what it's doing here. But the long-term plan for the rate stabilization reserve, that it would be drawn down to 0.
Okay.
Kind of like a fund accounting shift, so it used to be that you could put it all, you could commingle the funds, and now you have to.
Reduce the number
do
of funds.
Fund accounting, okay.
So if we go to slide 7, I guess what you have up here, operations reserve, do you expect operations costs to increase at 4% a year, rate of inflation, something like that?
That's roughly what we're looking at right now. And of course, if this is based upon, because it's based upon operations costs as well as commodity costs, if commodity costs were to rocket up, then we would, you'd see an increase in that as well. But then commodity costs is also passed through, so we would be collecting that from customers on that.
So over 11-year period here, you'd expect it to go up 40% or 44%, the rate of inflation?
Yes.
And it's flat.
It grows.
The gray line at the bottom, pretty close to flat.
It grows.
For the minimum. I'm looking at the minimum line.
Yeah. It does have a very slight growth over the period.
Not 40% over that period of time.
No.
So the question is, are these reserve lines being adjusted accurately for expected inflation or other costs?
Yes, they're.
Yeah, I think one thing to note is that the days of expense is based on operations and commodity costs. So in other words, what we would need to continue keeping staff out there running the utility and buying gas to serve customers for 60 to 120 days. But
So
not,
this includes some
to continue capital
expected
investment.
reduction in commodity costs offset by increase in operations?
Yes, there's an element of that. And also, there's the fact that there are some one-time operational costs, like the crossbore is a 3-year it's a 3-year project. But the increases in capital costs don't affect this. And since capital cost is largely the driver, you're not going to see as much of an increase in the guideline levels as you would in the rates themselves.
Sorry, but didn't the question start by establishing that operational costs increase at the rate of inflation, 3 or 4%? Because I think Commissioner Danaher's observation is that this line isn't increasing 3 or 4% a year.
Yeah, I understand. And that's where the one-time costs associated with the cross-bore program come in. So those are
They're falling out.
they're falling out, exactly. And that offsets the inflationary increases.
I see in the electric, we do have a steeper slope to the line there. Right. And the operations reserve is not to handle capital costs, right? That's the CIP budget, is that correct? Or am I wrong on that?
No, yes, it's not meant to handle, it's not designed to handle CIP costs, although I will say that the risk assessment level does assume that if we had like part of that is that if we had a 10% rapid increase in CIP costs, that's part of what's built into that blue line. So to be able to handle a one-time hit, so.
Okay, real quick, can I just make one quick comment about the CIP? We did increase the budget substantially this year. I think in the past, we were budgeting about $3.5 million per gas main replacement, and this year going forward, we're budgeting about $6.5 million. So we doubled the budget for those.
Okay, that's to handle the increased construction costs. Okay, thank you, that's very good to know.
And Commissioner Danner, just to clarify a little bit, we do use the operations reserve for capital cost variances. We just want to make sure to keep within the guidelines when we do that. Keeping in the guidelines means that we have at least 60 days of, we have funds to get through at least 60 days of operations in case of any sort of a major emergency where we had trouble collecting revenue, for example.
Okay.
So within that band, we could use it to fund capital variances.
Thanks. All right. Any further questions or discussions? Is there any motion on the staff's recommendation?
I'll move that we accept the staff's recommendation.
Second?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes. All right. Eric, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Jonathan, would you like to lead on our next item?
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a review of our, of the local solar plan. So we're going to provide you both an update on progress on the local solar plan and some thoughts that we've had for how to move forward in the future. I know this has been an important topic for the UAC and finance as well, and we're hoping that this gives us a chance to flesh out some more thoughts from all of you. And I'd like to introduce Sonika Chowdhury, a resource planner in the Resource Management Division who's taking the lead on this project.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good evening, commissioners. So you have a report in front of you which provides details of our updates so far and discussion of the next steps. So in today's presentation, I'll go over some of the highlights. And before I get started, I would like to recognize my colleagues Shiva Swaminathan and Monica Padilla for their continuous guidance on the local solar plan. And it's Monica's pretty much last UAC meeting as she's changing jobs, and she was really interested to hear this discussion on the solar. So thank you, Monica. And many other from our marketing team, including Lisa and Justin, who are right now in the implementation phase of these programs. So as Jonathan said, our purpose for today's update is twofold. First of all, providing you an update on our implementation efforts so far. And as you might have heard in past few months, we were #1 outreach partner for the regional group buy program, SunShares, as well as we had an important milestone for the NEM transition program. So we moved from our initial NEM program to NEM successor program. And as we had over the past few meetings with this UAC, our discussion of the community solar program, and in that context, this whole consideration of what are our future goals for local solar and our program priorities for these initiatives. So would like to get your feedback there today. So as you may know, like we adopted the local solar plan in 2014, and this was subsequent to the adoption of the carbon neutral portfolio pledge in 2013. So when City Council approved this plan, the carbon neutral portfolio was already implemented or adopted, and implementation was going on. And local solar plan was kind of an umbrella policy, so it subsumed the existing program at the time, which were mainly state-mandated programs, such as SB1, which required us to provide 13 million rebates over the 10 years. It subsumed the existing program and set these strategies to reduce soft cost and barriers which help customer to adopt solar, and as well as provided guidance and in the following priority order for the staff to consider new program initiatives such as community solar, solar donations, and group buy. And overall, so yeah, and we've been nationally recognized for our efforts for the local solar plan. We received the SEPA award in 2014 for our citywide efforts of bringing all the departments together and having this holistic approach for supporting local solar. And this has been our growth of local solar so far for over past 2 decades. And I'll characterize it in like 3 main tranches. So starting from late 1990s and early 2000, solar costed 10 times as it does now, and there were mainly these demonstration projects that we started with. Until 2006, when we had this SB1, which was a state mandate for 1 million roofs in California, and required Palo Alto to provide 13 million in rebates over next 10 years. So from 2006 to 2013 and 14, we had mainly the local solar developed in Palo Alto, incentivized by our rebates program. And in 2014, when our rebates were sunsetting for the PV Partners program, that's when the local solar plan, the umbrella policy came in, which guided us to look into the cost-effective local solar programs. And since then, one of the programs we've been very successful doing is the annual group buy, which provides the clarity on what's the price of local solar through these turnkey solution providers. And as well as our transition to the NEM successor program, or NEM 2, has been kind of pretty much like the first in the state, and one of the first utilities in the state where we are not providing 100% retail offset for the having rooftop solar. It's more cost justified, and current our export credit prices are 7.5 cents, as versus giving the full credit for the retail rates, which is close to 15 cents. So, and this was an important milestone which we achieved in December 2017, this transition of the program. These are all our ongoing programs and the future consideration. I won't go over all these details here, but it's in your report, and including that community solar program is still under the evaluation phase. And solar donation, as of now, we are not proactively considering going with that program, given its challenges of finding a suitable nonprofit. So given our efforts till date, as of 2018, we have significant projects in the pipeline, and if all of those got constructed this year, we'll be having over 2% of our energy coming from local solar. And this has been achieved by our implementation efforts so far. And this slide kind of summarizes our past, present, and future activities in the area of supporting and facilitating our customer adoption of local solar. And the one highlighted in the black which are currently in play, including our consideration for distributed energy resources strategies. So, and this includes, as you may recall, we had this discussion late last year, local solar, but as well as batteries, controllable loads such as EVs, smart thermostats. So it's an umbrella policy. And given that DER consideration now, we are revisiting this local solar plan And where we are right now, that given our current projections for the 2023, we are unlikely to meet our 4% goal. We'll be close to 3% with our existing programs, unless some very large projects, which we haven't forecasted, comes into the play. So we are unlikely to meet our goals. And the feedback which we are seeking from you today is our consideration of two approaches or two alternatives. Alternative one is what we've been doing is like following our council direction for the local solar plan and achieving, giving our best to achieve 4% penetration level by 2023. And this will require consideration of new solar programs and reaching out to new customers. Or we can look into other approach, or alternative two is we maintain our existing level of efforts where we facilitate customers to go solar. And we can revisit or discontinue our program goals for local solar penetration. And new solar programs can be evaluated in the overall framework of our DER plan, where we consider the trade-offs of this program fulfills more of our sustainability goals. This program fulfills more of our customer preference and prioritization, and try to pick the best option for our customer program prioritization. So with that, I'll open it for your questions, feedback.
Thank you. Very clear presentation. Questions, comments? You don't have to start at the end, any of you. Judith?
So how did the original 4% goal get picked? Was it just sort of out of the air, or?
I can actually ask my colleague Monica, since she's here and she led the effort. Monica, can you help us there?
Does this turn on? Hi, I'm Monica Padilla, Senior Resource Planner. So the 4% represents basically where we thought we were going to get by 2030. And so it's actually accelerating it by investing more staff time and resources to get there earlier rather than later. But it was kind of a natural, deployment of solar that we saw. We actually worked with a community advisory group called KEEP, which stands for, I think Walter Hayes was part of that group, and he was very much focused on establishing a goal for the city, and so he actually came up with the 4% by 2023. That was his goal that we as staff embraced, and then council also adopted.
Okay, so there wasn't any it wasn't a data-driven decision. It wasn't.
No, we had a forecast of where we would get in 2030, and it was just an acceleration of that forecast by increasing our activity level.
So one of the things that I find really interesting is that when it comes to EV adoption, the city hasn't had to provide financial incentives. They haven't had to do anything. People's natural enthusiasm has gotten people to buy from the lower-priced EVs to the higher-priced EVs, and the adoption is very enthusiastic. Do you have any thoughts as to, and maybe my fellow commissioners, as to why the adoption of rooftop solar has not been enthusiastic? And it may be as simple as we like our trees, and so lots of people have shaded roofs, and so it's, not big. But why has that not been as enthusiastically embraced, even with some incentives?
Well, I come back to the conversation we had a few months back on exactly this topic of whether or not this is a program that has tremendous value. Clearly, for the subscribers, there's a feeling of value. For myself, I still have a very hard time understanding how it makes anything about delivering utility service to these customers either more reliable or more carbon neutral. I guess I can understand that the electrons travel a little less distance, but I think when you have the big PV farm with the PPA, it's coming in at high voltage, and arguably the efficiency of bringing that PV in might be higher. I don't know. But since it's coming from solar energy, I'm not sure it really matters. And so then I keep trying to think of what is the reason it's better. You're creating shading somewhere locally within Palo Alto with the PV arrays, and so you need less air conditioning. Okay, maybe. And then I get to, well, maybe you take some load off some of the distribution networks, which is coming up in the next discussion. But this isn't all over the place, right? This is in a few key spots, so I'm not sure you really save yourself from upgrading all of the 25 kVA transformers throughout the city through this program. So I have a very hard time understanding how it makes us, I'm going to get to your question, how it makes us safer, how it makes us have lower carbon footprint. The only thing is it's kind of cool sounding. And so that may have something to do with why the adoption rate is only 3% or 1.4% or whatever it is, instead of the aggressive adoption of EVs, where everyone directly understands what's changed when you have an EV.
Because I think that people do it because, like my friends, some of whom live in Palo Alto and some of whom don't, who have big solar arrays on their house, did not do it for financial reasons. They did it because there was this emotional reason that they wanted to be part of this, and it was, they felt it was the green thing to do. And so, what it may say is that our expectations of how emotionally green people are, there may be fewer of those people than sometimes we think in Palo Alto. And so I'm curious if you guys have a thought about that.
I have a comment on this, like the whole perception. So when customers come to us for solar, and as we do these workshops for the annual SunShare programs, one way which helps our other utilities program is we send them, like, have you considered all cost-effective energy efficiency? Those customers would not have reached out us to on their normal course of way for the energy efficiency savings, but when they are considering solar, we can direct them for the energy efficiency. And as well as consideration for electrification, including if you are going to buy an EV, how can you increase your size of panels or other electrification in the home? So, and those provide us more bang for our bucks for our sustainability programs, that like reducing fossil emissions from cars and other sources. So I'll say, like, yeah, going solar, as you were saying, is optional in Palo Alto because our baseline portfolio is already carbon neutral. But since it's a customer preference and they are coming to us, it helps us to serve in this role of trusted advisor and guide them step by step, consider energy efficiency, consider other sustainability efforts, and then consider for solar.
But we just had a conversation about how much we are going to have to continue to raise rates as hydro is challenged. Why does it make sense for us to raise our rates to make solar, to generate PV locally, instead of generating PV at lower cost from a large solar farm? Why does that make sense? When on the day when the main PG&E grid is out of service, the local solar assets are just as off as the large solar farm. That's the part I don't understand, is that we're effectively deciding when we endorse this program, we're effectively deciding that we would like to have solar panels be inside the city instead of in a large solar farm because we want the rates to be higher. There's an intangible benefit that I can't put my finger on, and that's why we're doing it. And that goes along with higher rates. And maybe I have this upside down, but that's, I think, the net.
Like you support alternative 2.
I absolutely like alternative 2. I like figuring out, since they're local assets, I very much like alternative 2, which I know is part of the next topic. But I don't understand alternative 1.
The other thing,
like one from resource planning perspective, as we discussed, one reason for increasing rates on the supply portfolio has been these transmission access charges. So local generation could be it could be natural gas as Santa Clara does, it could be local solar in Palo Alto. It helps us hedging against those increasing transmission charges in the future. So that's one value proposition on the financial parts.
Is it in fact lower, though? When we talked about it the last time, even with those charges, it was still more expensive.
Well, and I think what's important is who pays in that situation, right? We've set our rates so that we're pretty much indifferent to people putting solar on their roof. So then the potential driver of increased costs and therefore rates ends up being the amount of staff time we spend on promoting a program to try and achieve 4% by 2023. We do spend time on programs that our customers want because it helps us, as Sonika said, in that to be a trusted advisor to them on their energy use. And I think what we're trying to decide right now is whether this is one of those programs that we want to be spending time on, even if it doesn't result in a reduction in rates, for example.
So one of the things that I think doesn't get talked about in all of these is the idea of coincident or non-coincident supply and demand. So the idea of if part of what people coming in and talking to you about solar is an important byproduct, I think teaching people, educating people about if all of our electricity is produced within a short window, and yet when we're actually using it is in a different window, I think people need to understand that better. And so I would encourage that whichever alternative gets picked, that's brought into it, because I think that this is, talking earlier about the rise of CCAs, part of it is because they're not looking at that. And it's, we're going to give you 100% of your energy from solar, except that those electrons can't come from that at night. And so I think that educating people about actual facts in that sense would be really helpful. Now, I tend to agree with what Arnie was starting to talk about, was this idea, and what Jonathan talked about, this idea of who benefits. So if I put solar on my roof, I might personally benefit, but the community doesn't benefit. If we do if we buy into a solar array that comes at a lower cost, that's benefiting the entire community. And I think as what I like about the idea of alternative two is that then you can put these things in a context where it's a benefit to the whole community. So if you want to say you want to do something for lower income people or people who are having trouble paying their utility bill, and so the people who are challenged that are trying, that some parts of the city council are trying to protect or help, that might be something that could be part of it. But I think that looking at it within the incentives as being within the solar, how it benefits in the DER plan framework makes a lot of sense to me, because if somebody can afford to put solar on their roof, just like they can afford to buy a Tesla, I don't think that Palo Alto has to be the one hand-holding. There are enough vendors now, and if you want to, I just think that we don't have to provide the incentive. If the demand is there, people will do it themselves. They're not waiting for the utility to tell them to go buy an EV. Okay, and so I really like alternative two as a more effective way of doing things for members of the community, which still shows, you can still be supportive if somebody wants to put solar on their roof. I'm not saying to do anything that would discourage them, but I think if we're looking at where do we invest staff time and resources, I'd rather see it there, personally.
We've had discussions in the past, and I think, Ed, you mentioned this in connection with the electric utility earlier, that there are benefits to having generation locally. And so I'm not saying I'm against alternative 2 or strongly in favor of alternative 1, but I'd like to hear why local solar doesn't provide us with benefits that we get from local generation.
So the big problem you have is that the conventional solar inverter is a grid tie only solar inverter.
And there's no way to...
And there is a way to make such an inverter act in a standalone fashion, and it's sort of hidden in the last row of alternative 2. You can make a voltage source inverter from solar, but it's awkward because generally the solar wants to start acting like a current source, and so you usually just grid tie it and take whatever energy the solar's making and put it in the grid. If you put energy storage with the solar, then you can.
Okay, so for the simple-minded, like me, what you're saying is that at this point, given the way that the local solar generation would tie into the grid, really the only benefit that we get out of local generation is the reduced transmission charges. Is that?
Yeah, and exactly as Commissioner Ballantyne was saying, we need storage for them to operate in emergency when the grid is down, microgrid settings, which is gaining some traction, but still not very cost effective in Palo Alto, having your storage plus solar system at a residential level.
And it only benefits the one homeowner. It doesn't do anything. So if your next door neighbor has solar and you don't, and even if they have a standalone system, unless he invites you over to be in his house, you don't get any benefit.
Well,
Well, I think there would be. I mean, I think people would invite each other over. I think that in an emergency, you would have situations where if you had local generation, it could tide people over for a short period of time.
And we also talked last time about there certainly would be a mechanism to purchase the kilowatt hours that come from a regionally located local solar asset, like the local, the Palo Alto school that's, not more than 4 blocks or so from any residents in Palo Alto could.
Yeah, but that's different. That's a community resource. That's my point.
I know, but that could be part of alternative 2.
Right. Yeah.
No, I just, I mean, I think as you're hearing and have heard before, this sort of, I'm just back on the second bullet point, revisiting the LSP goal. It sounds as if when it was enacted in 2014, it came from a wellspring of desire to sort of do the right thing and be green, but to Commissioner Schwartz's point, was not at that time data-driven, and was also 4 years ago, the whole state and the California grid, as well as Palo Alto, were in such a different place with respect to renewables and with respect to solar adoption that it absolutely needs to be revisited. Like the duck curve at the time was a possibility and now is very much a reality. And so, just to circle back on, framing the conversation with council, I think we absolutely need to revisit the 4% goal, which was sort of laudable at the time, but we know so much more now than we did then. But I think what we want to continue to tap into is this desire to do the right thing and to be, sustainable. But we also now are thinking much more about resiliency than I suspect that the policymakers were in 2014, and we think that's the next sort of aspirational goal for a program, is to remain sustainable, but add community resilience to the target. Like other commissioners, I definitely come down in favor of alternative 2 because it seems to capture what we all want as the goal, which is to I mean, I like that it continues to say continue to facilitate customer adoption of local solar. At the current level of effort, like, there's no reason to stop facilitating group buys and to stop streamlining permitting. It will be interesting to see with the NEM successor rate what the next round of group buy does. I mean, I would actually argue that getting to 2%, far from being, comparing it to EV adoption, I don't know. I suspect that 2% is actually a really great adoption rate to have achieved, and we, can feel good about that. EVs have benefited from a lot of federal incentives that weren't coming from Palo Alto. They're also, people have to buy a car every few years. They don't have to buy a new energy system every few years. So it's not really apples to apples to compare EV adoption. But I think, hopefully what you're hearing from us is a lot of interest in a new aspirational policy direction that would incorporate storage. Yes, solar, but especially solar with storage, with smart inverters, so that we can address, in addition to, sort of vaguely feeling like we're doing the right thing environmentally, but really can get to community resiliency at the same time.
And I'll offer a comment. What I felt is that we need to rank things, our sustainability dollars, where we get the most bang for the buck. So some of it may be storage, it's energy efficiency, it's maybe putting in more chargers to increase electrification in multi-unit dwellings or whatever. So this was a great program, but I think the 4% level goal ought to be revisited and maybe quantify different choices in terms of how much staff time you devote to the whole thing, since we have carbon neutral, and where else would you put that staff time? This is my sense. Maybe, Arnie, maybe you can comment. Do we need to change the law to change those inverters, or are they?
No, actually, Rule 26? 27.
27, yeah.
Rule 27. In California, it's Rule 21. In Palo Alto, it's Rule 27. These rules come from a piece of clear guidance that's written by the IEEE. It's called IEEE 1547 for our fun reading. And these go back to a history for DER assets to make sure that utility people weren't injured trying to repair an outage while a distributed generator is trying to connect to the grid and make power. And what they established was you can imagine a box, a rectangle of voltage and frequency, where when the grid is outside of that normal range, the distributed asset is required by law, by that IEEE, which is then reinforced by California Rule 21 and Palo Alto Rule 26, the distributed asset's required to disconnect and then wait and monitor. And that asset cannot reconnect until the grid comes back inside the normal range for a period of time, and then it can connect. So that's clear. And what's also very clear is there are other standards for inverters where when you then flip the switch so that you're not connected to the grid and you're operating as what you can think of as an electrical island, you then can become a voltage source, make 60 hertz electricity, and power the assets in the city hall, the fire department, your house, whatever. But you don't reconnect to the grid until the grid comes back inside that rectangle. So the good news is that's all very nicely handled in Palo Alto Rule 26, along with some things that also help those inverters fight as hard as they can to help the grid until it goes out. But once it's out, it's outside that rectangle, the rectangle rule applies.
All right. Should we be considering actions to encourage people to have that sort of inverter?
Yeah, I think that, when I look at alternative 2, my eyes jump right to the bottom part, that last bullet, and think, if you had some energy storage or other means, I always imagine what if I just took a recreational vehicles inverter and wired up a whole bunch of RV LEDs in my house on a simple circuit? You know, I could probably do that with the same kind of wires I use for the train set that my son and I like to operate. It'll all be at very low voltage, of course, well, you know, like with the voltage of cell phones. Is that DER? Well, it is. So, you know, are there programs like that where you start to get to low voltage distribution inside houses, which is, of course, much safer, all powering LEDs? And when I look at that bottom line, that's what I think of. Bigger batteries, of course, to power City Hall, the fire department during those outages, but also little batteries for smaller loads in our homes.
So you might suggest that that's a better use of staff time, Bill, look into
I think so.
how we
Yeah.
do that. All right.
And on the DER plan, we'll be coming back to the UAC this summer with results from our customer survey as well, where we go over all the customer technologies and options. So that can inform our
Okay, thank you.
further plans.
I think that one of the things that's in the industry in terms of visionary goals is this idea of the energy prosumer, that, you know, this person is this self-sufficient, person that takes care of all their energy needs. And I just want to say that I am very skeptical of that, just as I am that everybody's going to take their home garden and be self-sufficient on their food. You know, we like having farmers markets, we have really great grocery stores around here, and I just don't think that most people are gonna have someone at home who can figure this all out, or that they want to. And I think one of the great things about modern industrial society is that we have this safe, reliable grid, and the idea that we're going to make everybody have to grow their own is not necessarily a benefit to society, and it certainly isn't a benefit to lower income people who can't afford to make major investments, because, you know, right now batteries are very short duration. It's not a long duration supply. You know, it's not, we're not like super close. So the idea of experimenting with some things where you really can have a safe microgrid that helps in an emergency, where you really think about these things. And we're still in the practice stages of what it is. And so it's not, it's like where somebody hears about an idea for a drug and, oh, it's a really cool idea, and they have a couple of cells in a test tube that does it. And that's not the same thing as everybody can go out and buy Bayer aspirin. And so I think that I just want to make sure that as we're setting up our aspirational goals, it is still a challenge. If we could come up with some really cool community solar, microgrid applications that could work in an emergency, we would really be setting the stage for the world. So we don't have to worry that we have to jump all the way to everybody being self-sufficient, in my opinion.
Let's, Lisa, you were looking like you wanted to say something a moment ago. No, okay, you don't have to.
No, it's a picky little question. I'll let it go.
All right. Is there more discussion, AC?
Having the benefit of the education from my fellow commissioners, I'm now very comfortable with alternative 2.
All right, all right. Well, we don't need a resolution for this since it's discussion, but I think the sense of the group is alternative 2, which is really maybe more interesting for the staff because it embraces a wider choice of things. So thank you very much for the report.
Yeah, and thank you for your feedback and clarity on our future directions. So that's really helpful. Okay, so should I change and move to? Yeah. You have any comments to add, Ed? No? So switching gears here, somewhat related but a different topic, on the assessment of our distribution system and how it is getting impacted with DERs. And you have also a detailed report for this in front of you, and I'll go over some highlights here. And For this effort, I would like to recognize my colleague Jimmy Pechkara, Senior Electrical Engineer, who is with us. And yeah. And as well as many others team members who helped with this, including Shiva, Eric Wong, and a few of our other engineers, Tom Ting and Mike Mintz. So it's been an ongoing collaborative effort with resource planning and our engineering staff. Okay. And as you might recall, late last November, we shared our overview and all these strategies related to how we are going about developing our DER plan, which informs our integrated resource planning for our supply side as well. And there are various elements of it, and distribution system assessment informs one of the component, which is related to our distribution system planning. So this is one action, one strategy of our overall plan. And purpose for our today's update is twofold again. First of all, sharing our assessment result on our system assessment, and as well as developing this common understanding on what are potential system constraints and how we are planning to understand those and mitigate those. So before we talk about the Palo Alto system, I would like to give a high-level overview of some of the industry trends. Mainly in California has been on the leading edge, as well as along with Hawaii and New York. There have been a lot of discussion in the industry. What are the benefits of well-integrated DERs? And these are in line with some which we already discussed, such as the number 4 in this list, potential of intentional islanding or creating this microgrid. So that's one potential benefit of solar plus storage and other smart controls. And also, for example, the peak shaving of the system. And some of the California utilities, as well as in New York, are taking these demonstration projects that instead of investing into all these dollars into upgrading heavy equipment in the substations, they are looking if they can encourage these customer-side technology and save in that, defer those investments for a few years. At the same time, from utility system planning, we see some challenges as well. And these challenges are related, for example, our overloading of some of our system components with electrification and EV load growth, and some of the voltage fluctuation and protection issues that is more of with the intermittent generation from solar and cloud cover. And to understand these system constraints, integration capacity analysis has been done in California, is also called hosting capacity, how much of your system can handle without needing any significant upgrades. And the results I'll be sharing today, some of our preliminary results are in line of informing our, like, what's Palo Alto systems integration capacity for DERs. So this is our one-line diagram of our system, and you may have heard some components of it before. So Palo Alto receives our transmission services from the PG&E line, 3 of those at high voltage of 150 kilowatts. And they come at the Colorado Power Substation, which is located at 101 and East Bayshore. So we receive power through these transmission lines at one of our substations. And then it gets distributed to the 9 substations throughout the city through our sub-transmission network, which is 40% of it underground and overground.
Sonika, let me interrupt if you could, because I see Monica's about to leave. So before Monica leaves, sorry, I'm gonna do a commercial break here. Sonika mentioned earlier, and you certainly experienced the history that Monica was able to bring to the conversation on the establishment of the 4%. She also mentioned, and I don't think we did an official announcement that Monica is leaving us. She is actually, I think it's officially retiring, is that correct? Using that term. officially retiring in order to, well, to move on to the next phase of her professional career, which will actually be with Silicon Valley Clean Energy, CCA. So we really just want to take the moment to acknowledge and thank Monica for her, is it 28 years of 31, oh my gosh, I missed a few. 31 years of service to the city of Palo Alto. And yes, that's really, just give you a moment. I was hoping you might be here to the end of the meeting, but obviously we want to allow you to get on with your life, so thank you. Thank you.
All right, Monica, thank you very much. We've known better never to question or challenge anything you've had to say to us, so. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been a true pleasure serving this commission and serving the city, and hopefully my next job will actually go as good as this one.
All right, I'm sure you're lucky to get you. All right. Bye.
Okay, after the commercial break, let's get back to our, so yeah, overall our system is designed with the radial flow of the power from higher voltage to lower voltage to the end customers, and main components being the substation, which host our larger transformers and protection devices. Then we have feeder lines, which are like primary main lines bringing the power. And then local neighborhood distribution transformer, which you might see on the pole top or the pad mounted. We have 3,000 of those. And our system, we have visibility on the larger components of the system through the SCADA monitoring system in the real time as well as in the 15 minutes interval. But the smaller components of the system, including distribution transformers and our end meters, we don't have that visibility as we don't have currently the smart metering infrastructure. And as you might know, our peak load is close to 200 megawatts, and we are very commercial heavy. 80% of our energy sales goes to commercial customers in Palo Alto. So with that overview of our system, most of the DERs are coming towards the customer side, and potential to mess up with this radial flow from high voltage to low voltage. They can send power backwards as well. And this is again like one of the charts you may recall from your last DER plan discussion we had late last year. And what it represents is a typical peak day in 2030. And on the x-axis, these are the hours from 0 to 24 throughout the day. And on y-axis, it represents our peak load. And the dark gray line is how we currently see our peak load profile, peaking around 3 to 5 p.m. in Palo Alto, mainly in summer days and with the commercial customer load. And the dotted line is the best kind of like we are assuming that solar PV will be from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. EV load, which is represented in the blue colors, we are assuming like it's coming at the nighttime, and some during the daytime for the workplace charging. Energy efficiency represented in green throughout the day. And some of the technologies such as demand response in orange and energy storage in black, they are being dispatched in the middle of the day to bring our peak load down. So this is on an average typical peak day in 2030, and that's the impact on our system level. But as we have different neighborhood and different locations throughout the city, this picture would look very different. And one area where we are looking is residential neighborhoods, which is expected on an average to have 30% load increase by 2030. Yeah, because of EVs mainly, yeah.
What adoption rate did your second bullet there, or the EV, what adoption rate did you build into the model?
Yeah, good question. And to answer that, I have this second slide. So that's what we are assuming for our baseline forecast for EVs. So for the residential customer, it's represented in the red color. And in 2017, we have close to 3,000 EVs in Palo Alto. That's our estimate at the end of calendar year 2017. And coming few years, we are expecting this number to almost double, 5,000 or 6,000 by 2020, depending on when the long-range EVs come into the market, and mostly Model 3. That's been the main driver for EVs growth in Palo Alto, one of the main drivers for EVs growth in Palo Alto. And by 2030, we are expecting 40% of our residential customers, they adopt EV. And almost an equal number of commuter vehicles coming to Palo Alto are EV as well. One of the assumptions that is built in here is majority of the charging happens at residential. So if you own an electric car, one assumption based on our existing studies, 80% of the charging happens at home and 20% at workplace. So that's one of the assumptions built in for the system level 5% load increase.
Does your model have a way to tell the difference between today's plug-in hybrid EVs that have a relatively limited battery capacity and, let's say, the 2030 or the even the Model 3, as you point out, the longer range EVs that are going to have batteries in the 2 to 3 to even 4 or 5 times capacity range? Or is that something that probably need to figure out how to build a model like that?
The later part of your comment, our model as of now is simplistic, and we need to figure out the short-term range EVs and long-term range EVs and their impact on our system load and energy usage.
What I didn't understand is if you have all these residential EVs, some of which are driving to some other location, presumably to people to go to work, and then you have all these cars coming in with the commuters, why is there so much less capacity needed for the commuters?
So the impact on the system, as I said earlier in the slide, one of the slides, is 80% of our energy sales happen to commercial customers. So they are already consuming a lot. And on top of that, the impact of EVs would be small because they are already consuming lots of energy.
So you're assuming that it's at their site and it's just going to be part of their, okay.
The commercial load.
I think what worries me is when I think of a level 2 charge moving towards a level 3 charge rate, where you're in the 10, let's call it 10 kilowatt to north of 30 kilowatt range, that when you have, maybe a building this size, which probably doesn't have a load of more than, I'm just guessing, it can't be more than half a megawatt, and well below that right now, I'll bet. But if we had all plugged in our vehicles downstairs and we're all charging at a rate of between 10 and 30 kilowatts, you look around the room and you count how many of us there are, and you say, wow, we doubled the building load. So that's the part that I always worry about when we have these models where you kind of tally it up and you say, well, if I project with the current adoption rate, it looks pretty benign, and it looks like it's a pretty small adder on the distribution network. But then I think where it's deceptive is these numbers today are a lot of Prius plug-in hybrids with a little, relatively small battery of something like 5 or 10 kilowatt hours, and Chevy Volts with a slightly larger battery, again, not bigger than something like 10 kilowatt hours. And even Nissan Leafs are modest at 24 kilowatt hours. They're not Chevy Bolts or Teslas or the other, 100% electric that, if you plug it in downstairs, somebody's going to be wanting to plug in with a level 2 or level 3 charge. And the group of us, if we all wanted to have enough charge to drive, say, back out of Palo Alto tonight or off to work in the morning because we're not plugged in at home right now, we'd be charging at those 10 to 30 to 50 kilowatt rates. And, you just tally it up, and there are more than, say, 10, 20 of us here in the room. we doubled the load of the building. So that's, and this isn't really cubicle density. So that's what always worries me when, I just run through the numbers in my mind. And when we get to when we talk about transformers, I have a couple questions because I just don't quite understand how to make it sum up if deceptively the plug-in hybrids turn into long-range EVs, and people are wanting to drive all the way up to Tahoe, and then they come home and it's going to be a rough Sunday night in Palo Alto.
We've talked in the past about future-proofing our chargers. I think we need smart chargers for all those reasons you said, and the technology is coming out, but then maybe you ought to look into enforcing those standards in Palo Alto.
So I hear your point on like the level 2 and level 3 chargers, and as of now our current approach is if a certain charger exceeds those thresholds, they have to undergo a detailed engineering review. So for example, for the DC fast chargers in Palo Alto, it's like a big solar project. They have to undergo the detailed engineering review there. And Jimmy, do you want to add more to that discussion?
So we were just talking about, just like with any other appliance that we have, there's always load diversity. So you guys hit the point on, how much these battery capacities are going to get better and better. EV chargers are going to get faster and faster, but at the same time, we don't know, we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you don't need to charge every night. You may have enough capacity, just like in your gas tank now, that, hey, I only used half my capacity today. I can get home. I don't need to charge. So, but going back to diversity, there's always so with all of our appliances, we talk about load diversity, and there's always a load factor. So we talk about, any kind of appliance, large electrical appliance, let's say it's your refrigerator, you don't take, even though the connected load maybe this many watts, you apply a load factor of maybe 30% or 40% or 50% because it's not running all the time, right?
Well, I take your point. This is a little bit different because you can pretty effectively turn a commute into kilowatt hours. Mm-hmm. I know pretty well that if I drive my daily commute with my Leaf, which I've now been driving since 2011, mm-hmm. I know pretty well that I'm going to consume 75% of the battery capacity, which means that when I plug it in with the extension cord and level 1 charge it at home in the driveway, I'm going to use 18 kilowatt hours that night.
Exactly, yeah.
It's going to happen every night. And to your point, I have to, because otherwise I'm not going to do the same thing the next day, because the capacity is only 24 kilowatt hours in that car. And if it was a heavier battery, then you're right, I could charge every 3 days. But when I did charge, I'd be charging 3 times as much. So then the load factor, to your point, the load factor would make the data noisy, mm-hmm. but Arnie's impact to the Palo Alto grid might be a peak on Thursday, but you could average it over those 3 days, it'd be the same. And so that, I'm still kind of back to worried. And I very much want to talk about the transformer sizing when you don't need to rush, but the 25 kVA, I divide that by 7 to 8 homes, and I'm like, okay, that's between 3.5 to 3.1 kVA per household. When we moved here, we had a bit of a family meeting. We took out all the incandescent lights in the house and made them all LEDs. And we decided we weren't going to run the air conditioning. And I've calculated that our household average load is 500 watts. That's probably not normal because, and I can tell you in the summertime, I get feedback on that decision of turning off the air conditioning. So it's probably not a normal average load in Palo Alto, but we figure that's the way we're being conscientious. But then when I charge my Leaf, I just have added, let's say I charge it over the nighttime, and I've just added close to 2 kVA. And so I'm a modest consumer of household electricity, and I've just put myself at 2.5 kVA. And when I take a 25 kVA transformer, which I'm pretty sure is what is behind my house, I just used almost my allotted fraction of that 3.1 to 3.5, and my wife didn't get her EV yet. But I know what she wants to do for, what's the family's next car going to be? Oh, yeah, it's going to be a longer range EV. And does she drive farther than I do? She does. So all of a sudden, Arnie might only hurt Palo Alto up to 2.5 kVA out of the 3.1 to 3.5, but then the family, wow, we're going to go north of 3.1 to 3.5, and we wouldn't even have to be level 2 charging to do it. That's what worries me.
And to your point, and that's our concern as well. So on our system assessment, for some of the larger components, for example, our substation transformers, we are using them at the 50% of the rated capacity. And we have enough capacity for our sub-transmission and the transmission services as well. Those are currently used at 30% of their full capacity. So in our assessment, as you said, the distribution transformers, these neighborhood distribution transformers are most vulnerable. And as of now, we are doing mostly case-by-case upgrades, like for when someone puts in a level 2 permit with the building department and their load exceeds a certain threshold, it comes to the engineering, and that triggers the transformer upgrade. But that's the area where we proactively want to study our mitigation options. And one option is we put more of these pole-top transformers, and one transformer serves 3 to 4 homes instead of current practice of design of 8 homes. And the other solution, as Commissioner Danhauer said earlier, could be these managed or intelligent charging, using maybe incentives for giving smart chargers at home and more staggered out charging, and giving us more comfort that these neighborhood distribution transformers are not being peaked at the same time.
Yeah, I really like the 3 to 4 home idea. I don't understand how when everybody comes home on Sunday night from Tahoe and then gets to take turns charging and gets to Monday morning and didn't charge up, I don't understand how you don't have a whole bunch of grumpy people that then say, you know what, I don't want to be part of the smart charging program anymore. If most EVs that you buy today, you can program the time of day at which they charge. I don't actually know very many people who turn that on. Most EVs that you buy today can also detune their ability to use their battery and use, say, 80% of the battery. I also don't know very many people that turn that on either. So I think I like your idea of thinking how to be proactive and just making sure that there's enough, just actual muscle in the neighborhood distribution, so that as there are more and more EVs and electrified house loads, you can handle it, yeah.
I think you do add some, I think it's really important for us to take to heart too what you're talking about in the Tahoe example, trying to think about unusual impacts and not just the routine commutes. What happens when everybody tries to do something like that? So.
Any more discussion on this point? What you see is there is a lot of interest, a lot of room for that staff time that we paid.
So there is one anecdote I will share with you that is a raging neighborhood controversy over the course of the last, I think we kicked it up in the last 60 days or so, actually less than that. One of our neighborhoods that has an underground utility district is due for a refresh. And so in the course of doing the refresh, our staff, anticipating load growth, said, let's go ahead and put in larger transformers, which will unfortunately be above ground rather than underground. And so that's the raging controversy. Now, we've at this point, I think, galvanized the neighborhood to the point of having a pretty clear conclusion that from their perspective as existing homeowners, it's certainly appropriate for the customer that decides that they want to get the EV, the second EV, to pay for their own transformer down the road, as opposed to build in the capacity today to accommodate in the future. So, I think we haven't heard the last of that, but I think it's pretty clear that there's a growing consensus that they'd rather maintain the existing capacity in the rebuild than to build in any additional capacity if it meant going above ground on the cabinets.
So I think this is a place where predictive analytics could really be useful, where you're looking at the analysis of where are the EV concentrations likely to be and whatever. So, for example, in a route I travel frequently in Old Palo Alto, not only do you see a lot of Teslas, but houses where they have one Tesla are now getting two Teslas. And, it's if the concentration, I noticed you in some of the charts, in some of the other analysis, you broke out like the north part of town versus the south part of town. I think as you start to look at the equity issue, which is tied to the rate issue, I think that idea that if you can say, look, we're seeing this mapping, and here's where the EVs are showing up, and we have to do this, that there might have to be something where different neighborhoods are treated differently, because this is always the trade-off of if you're a solar customer, but you still want to have electricity from the grid at night, just because your net metering says it's a wash, well, we still have to pay for all to be able to capacity and wires and everything to get you, and that's where the idea of demand charges come from. So I think that, again, I think it's really important to look at it in a holistic way and not just take the one neighborhood that says, well, I don't want to pay for it because we don't have EVs, to really and I think it's part of our job is to look at it in a more holistic way, because the costs have to be socialized across the community.
Right.
But there's a reason why you may say, hey, it really is more this part of town than that part of town.
I think I can just maybe skip to the key takeaways and some of the action items we have planned for next 2 to 3 years, including close study of our distribution transformers and considering any aesthetic impact, for one example and also revisiting our fees for these home upgrades. As of now, we have standard fees for 200 ampere panel, and if that needs to be increased for electric vehicle loads, considering there. And looking for our smart inverter capabilities and requiring them as part of our system operations. Thank you.
I think it would. It fits in very well with a number of the things that we talk about, sustainability and energy efficiency. The people from the city are involved in it. We actually had a presentation. I'm in the program. We had a presentation from the zero waste people who was very effective, very helpful. I'm going to try to put together a colleague's memo. I'm hoping I can get somebody to join me, but I would love to put that on the agenda to talk about.
Other thoughts on agenda items?
I think if you look at your attachment with a 12-month rolling calendar, you'll see that over the next few months, again, we're in the budget cycle, so I believe we will keep you pretty busy over the next few. Noting the interest in the cool block item, I will discuss that also with the city manager, and I know that the council has it pending. It was originally on a council agenda and was deferred, so based on that, it may provide a good opening for the UAC.
Sense, city manager, when it comes up for council, if we could review it first, might be useful.
Very good, we'll do. We'll discuss that with the manager.
And then, so Next session, have we decided on the time for the May 2nd meeting?
Let's see, yes, I believe we had, based on the doodle, the 4 o'clock PM time slot works, appears for the majority. It would note that Commissioner Trumbull was not likely able to make it, which is unfortunate. But that said, I think the majority are able to make it at that 4 PM.
Okay.
On the, is it the 2nd? May 2nd, I believe it was. Let me just double check. Okay, May 2nd, yes. Oh, there it is, May 2nd, on your agenda at 4 PM.
Okay. So it'll be budget and...
Budget, and I believe we actually do have a couple other items that would be ready to come forward at that time slot, so we'll make sure that we're able to manage your time.
Great. Any thoughts on things you want to have come up later in the year as we've got a little more room in our summer calendar? Sometimes we've skipped the August meeting, is that correct? Just because of vacations or?
That is correct. I think it has tended to be difficult to schedule.
All right.
I thought we usually skip the first week in July because it's the 4th of July week.
Well, we usually push that back. We usually push it to a different day.
Maybe that's what we do. Maybe that's what we do.
While we're at it, since we're getting a calendar, actually I have it already on the calendar for July 11. I think we've already made that decision. Yes. Okay.
Out in front of it this year.
Yes. And, all right.
We may want to verify again via doodle or what have you, that one meeting between July and August to confirm
Sure.
what that date is.
In the next, at the next meeting or something, we can check again, be closer to summer and people's schedules.
Did you say July 11th? I'll be at the SEPA, the Grid Evolution Summit if you do it on the 11th.
Yeah, well, I think we'd already made a decision to move it from the 4th to the 11th. So, Terry will be here, at least, we keep it on a Wednesday. Yeah, I felt badly about that. So, any other comments? Motion?
No, so the integrated research, the EIRP is in July, but we'll have talked about it before it is in June. Okay.
Yeah.
Are we going to look at the dates
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
with Monica's departure?
All right.
We need to look at that date again.
No,
All right, so we'll look forward to the May meeting, learning more about the budget and the like. Thank you for the reports today. Have a motion to adjourn?
Chair Donaher, could I make one
Oh,
quick
please.
statement? Sorry. So we had talked about last month that you were going to get an opportunity to look at the RFP that was going to go out for the fiber. It hasn't gone out yet. So the attorneys are looking at the RFP. It's about ready to go. So hopefully within the next week or two, you'll be receiving the RFP to the commission.
Oh, thanks for the update.
So, but I
on
just
that.
wanted to let you know, if you're looking for it, it isn't quite out yet. Thanks.
Thanks. All right, motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
All in favor? All right. Thanks, everybody.